Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Now, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're reading from a different Bible translation, the read is different, the message is the same. We're going to continue in our study through the 25th chapter of Matthew. Last time, we said that we were studying these parables that Jesus is telling, and to understand why Jesus is telling these parables, which is an expansion on the question he's answering: when is the sign of his coming? When is the end of the age? And he's telling them this because their expectation for the return of the Messiah is going to be delayed. So the thing is, what should they be doing then? Now, if they are rejecting the Messiah because he's not going to establish the king, he's also dealing with this, that there's going to be eternal consequences for that. So if you remember the one parable we told about the slave, right? He is responsible for caring for his fellow slave, but if the one slave says, my master is delayed, and he begins to mistreat the other slaves, he's going to be punished for that. We talked about the last time the 10 virgins or 10 bridesmaids, and the whole point was that they were to be prepared. And the way that they were to be ready and prepared is to have the oil so that their lamps would give light to the bridal party, to the bride as she goes out to meet her groom. Okay? So 5 were foolish and they did not provide oil. 5 were wise and anticipated that there might be a delay. Boys would be boys. And that's kind of what you had right here, that this elaborate celebration where the groom was delayed in coming at the appointed time. Well, the lamps were still burning, and it used up oil. So when the groom finally came and the announcement came, the groom is coming, prepare yourself, right? The wise got up and seeing that they were running out of oil, being wise that they had provided the oil, replenished their torch. Their lamps kept burning. Well, the foolish didn't have oil. Their lamps were going out for lack of oil. That's when they asked, hey, give us some of your oil. And they says, oh, we don't have enough, but go and buy some. But while they went out, right, to buy, the groom came by with the whole big progression and the pomp. Those who were ready they came out with their torches, and the bride was able to meet up with her groom, and they went into the wedding hall and enjoyed the wedding. Okay. Now, we also said this, and I said I wanted to say this, that one of the takeaways that we can have is that as believers, even though we're waiting for the coming of Jesus, and we're getting to the rapture and versus the second coming. But even with that, I think the takeaway from us here is that we're to be constantly looking, and we're to be ready, not from the standpoint of our salvation, but doing what God tells us to do. And that's the whole, I think, point right here. The message, the takeaway is be ready, doing what he tells us to do. Now, verse 14, this is another parable. He says, For it is just like a man going on a journey. He called his own slaves and turned over his possessions to them. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went on a journey. Now remember, you see this theme, right? He gave them what they needed. Their responsibility was to do what he had directed them to do. In this case, he's given talents, money. Okay? These talents were money. So 5 talents two, and then he says one, everyone according to their ability. So there was no unfairness about this, by the way. So in other words, the one who had one talent couldn't complain, man, you gave me too much. He gave each one according to their own ability. So he says, immediately, verse 16, the man who had received 5 talents went and put them to work, and he earned 5 more. In the same way, the man with 2 earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with him. The man who had received 5 talents approached and presented 5 more talents and said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I've earned 5 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man with 2 talents also approached. He said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. Look, I've earned 2 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You are a difficult man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid and went off and hid your talent in the ground. Look, you have what is yours. But that master replied to him, you evil, lazy slave. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and I would have returned. And when I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw that good-for-nothing slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, even though this may seem harsh, remember, first of all, they were slaves. Secondly, they didn't have the right to do with that talent. Okay, this was a measure of money, by the way, as they chose. And then also, Jesus revealed the true nature, you evil, lazy slave. Okay? Now again, remember, he's telling this to Israel. He's telling this from their perspective as his return to set up the kingdom is going to be delayed. So keep that in mind. That's what's going on here. Is that there is sort of a letdown that you're not going to restore the kingdom. Jesus says, not today. I'm going to be delayed. Today, I'm the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. That's the delay. And of course, there's other things we'll get into in other scriptures, but that's the delay, right? All right. So since I'm going to be delayed, you still have a responsibility. So at this point, do they reject Jesus? Do they reject the Messiah, even though he has clearly been manifested that he is the Messiah? God spoke from heaven on 3 occasions that he was his son, right? His works, his life declare that. So even though they're disappointed, even though they may not understand what's going on, they have enough to say, I'm going to submit to the Messiah. And so in these 3 particular instances, he tells them that this is what their responsibility is. And when they come, he's going to have some judgment. Those who are doing what he told them to do versus those who do not. Now, in verse 31, he's going to shift again. In this parable, he is sharing this parable from the standpoint of the nations. And this is going to be interesting. Verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all his angels with him, then he will sit on his throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, this kingdom is the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. It's called the millennial reigns, another by other terms, but it is the 1,000-year reign. Jesus, remember, as he had. I'll give this summary at the end. Let me finish reading this. But this is the earthly kingdom. That's what he's saying. When he comes here, he's going to separate the nations. And that's kind of the difference of what's going on here. That he is now dealing with the nations of the earth, how they treated Israel. Verse 34 again. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will say, and by the way, this is righteous nations. What makes them righteous? He's getting ready to say. I just said it, but he's going to tell them why they're righteous. Nations. Okay, he's talking about nations. So the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to eat? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or without clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, I assure you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it for me. Now that's the Jewish people again. Then he will also say to those on his left, meaning the goats. These are talking about the nations, evil nations who hated Israel. Depart from me, you who are cursed into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you didn't take care of me. Then the Lord will answer. Then they too will answer the Lord. Verse 44 again. Then they too will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or without clothes, or sick, or in prison, and not help you? Then he will answer them, I assure you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me either. And they will go away in eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now, one of the interesting thing about this parable that's different from the other three is that, remember, the other three deals with the internal people of Israel, what their responsibility is. This deals with the nations of the people outside of the nation of Israel, and with how God is going to judge the nation and how they treated Israel. Now, keep that in mind. He's dealing with how they treated Israel. So that's going to be interesting. Now, this is also called, what's going to, sort of in a sense, beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. So right now we know that we're in still the age of the world. The end of the world hasn't come. This time of man, okay, which also the gospel is being preached. So when that time comes to an end, then this day of the Lord will commence, a day of judgment where God will judge Israel. He also is going to judge the world, judge man for his wickedness. And then immediately after the tribulation, Jesus will come. And the first things he's going to do when he comes to the earth, and this is a bodily coming, a physical coming, where he will seize control of the earth. He will set up a 1,000-year reign. Okay, a 1,000-year reign. And so one of the first things he's going to do is going to separate the righteous nations from the evil nations. And the criteria, remember, is based upon how they treated Israel, his people. Interesting. So yes, do I think foreign policy that we should support Israel as always a good foreign policy? You bet. All right. So again, this was just a snapshot. So we're gonna get into other books and get into more in-depth study of eschatology, end times, or Bible prophecy. All right, so we're going to stop and we'll pick it up with chapter 26 now. Chapter 26. So I'll see you then.